Hi, and welcome to episode 2 in my series for Introduction to Sociology. My name is Denise Slayton, and I am faculty at Davidson Davie Community College. And I have created these video lectures to help students throughout, especially for my online classes, to understand sociology, giving examples and being able to apply the concept, theories, and perspectives to real life situations. All right, so in this episode, we're going to be talking about research methods. If you've just watched my episode 1, you understand that the whole idea of sociology is a systematic study of society. Father of sociology was Auguste Comte. The whole idea of his creation of sociology, wanting to study society, came about through all the social problems that he saw that came about through the Industrial Revolution. So, how do sociologists study society? What methods are used to make this a systematic study of society? And so there are several, and I'm going to go over those. And the first one is what is called field study. I start with this one because it's absolutely my favorite one to use, and it really kind of brings us into society. Field study is you're being immersed into the different activities of the areas that you want to study. You get to see people in their natural habitat, in a sense. Field studies are really great. For example, if you want to understand what are the effects of being homeless, what are the interactions? How do people treat you? And so you're coming up, remember the sociological imagination, you start asking why. This is very much like critical thinking. Why and how? And so you have an idea that comes up. It's a sociological question. Are people treated differently based on the way they dress when they go into expensive stores or into dining halls or into diners and restaurants? I always think about a very old movie called Pretty Woman, one of my favorite. And she was a prostitute. She hooked up with Richard Gere, and he hired her to be like his escort to many of the functions because he really didn't want to date anybody. And he told her to go out and get nice clothes, and she went in down Rodeo Drive, and nobody would help her because of the way she was dressed. And so, you kind of come up with that question: does that really happen? And so, if you wanted to do that, you would do a field study. And so, you're going to do what's called a participation observation. You have to have kind of a hypothesis: what might happen, what might not happen, an idea of what you want to look at, and then go about. Maybe you dress up in clothes that we give meaning to, that tells people we're homeless or not very wealthy. And then maybe going into restaurants, or dirty clothes, smelly, not taking a shower, going into high-end retail stores, and then keeping track and making sure that you're making notes on what are the interactions, how are people treating you. Now, to make this reliable, and also you need to go to different places. You can't just go to one. And so that's one way. Now, when I was in graduate school, I was taking a class on research methods, and we were told that we had to come up with a research method, one of the many. And I was told I had to be at a place if I was going to do field study for about 8 weeks for long periods of time. And I remember thinking, where do I want to spend this kind of a time at? And I was also very interested in some of my sociological questions were flirting, dating, and things like that. And so I said a bar. That would be a lot of fun. And so I chose a bar, and I spent the next 8 weeks on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sunday nights, about 5 to 6 hours a night, studying and being observant at the bar. What was happening? And when I came in, my idea was that flirting would be more aggressive by males. That was my experience. That's what I thought. But I had to use a beginner's mind and leave that aside and be open to whatever happened. Now, Fridays and Saturday nights, it was a live band. It was a country western bar. And so I started to go, and become very observant. I started, the first night after I came home, I drew a drawing of the layout of the bar, where everything was situated so I could remember everything. I kept a notebook so that I could do what's called content analysis. And I had to come up with some terms like what is flirting behavior. I had to make sure that I defined what I was looking for. Is it grabbing somebody's butt? What kind of comments? And label that. I took a lot of notes. I also did some of the other research methods. I did surveys, or interviews, not surveys. I didn't hand anything out because nobody knew I was studying the bar. I had to keep, to this day, I can't tell anybody. I couldn't tell my professor, although she loved it and wanted to go find the bar. But I can't tell you the name of the bar, even though it's been almost 30 years ago. And because of confidentiality, who knows? You might be one of the grandchildren of the women that I'm going to talk about. And so I started taking notes, very detailed, thick notes every night after I'd come back. I'd keep some notes for content analysis. How many times there was flirting behavior from females? Were they single? Were they married? What about guys? What was said? And then wrote very thick, detailed notes. Now, at the end of this whole thing, it was a 45-page paper, which is graduate level, and going into a great deal of detail. And this is what's called an ethnography, very thick description. Anybody who read it could imagine themselves at that bar and what was going on. Now, over the 8 weeks, what I found was very different of what I expected. It turned out that the single woman, and it was very interesting how the bar was not set up. Nobody came up and said, I think I'm going to create this bar because I think this is the way people are going to interact. It was set up, and then the interactions built around that. And so the men's bathroom was over in a far corner, and there was one way in and one way out, and it was through this aisleway where booths were situated on each side. And over the 8 weeks, I found that single women would go over there, and they were very aggressive in their flirting, actually much more than men, which, again, that beginner's mind, I had to be open to that. Now, I also saw later on that when those same women were out in the rest of the bar and around other people, that flirting behavior wasn't there. Another interesting aspect was this one section that only couples went to. And it was almost kind of sectioned off like a little picket fence. And that's where the couples stayed. And if you ventured in there, especially if you were a guy and you weren't with anybody, you would get dirty looks of, hey, what are you doing here? And so being observant throughout this. And this is one of the research methods. It's a lot of fun. And there are a lot of sociologists out there you wouldn't even know that are studying society through participation observation. Now, if I had written up my paper, but I wanted to add my feelings and perspectives on it, not just coming from, here's what I saw, kind of reporting the details, that one is ethnography. But if I add my feelings, my opinions, then it becomes an autoethnography. And you have to kind of identify that so people know this is also, here's the results, but then you're putting your own touch on it and your feelings and opinions. Another research method that is very helpful that sociologists use is what's called surveys and interviews. Now, with our technology today, surveys have been a great way to gain much more information across many areas in a very timely fashion. You've probably taken surveys. You're asked all the time, McDonald's, Walmart, everywhere. Even at the end of my classes, we have the course evaluations. These are surveys. And so surveys are a great way, although you don't get the natural environment, but you can get a lot of information. Now, when you're creating your surveys to study society, you have to be very careful with some of the things. So first, you have to do what's called an operational definition. you have to decide, what do I want to look at? So in some of my classes, especially seated classes, we do an activity, and then on my online you have that too. And I give you a sample survey. And on the sample survey, the whole idea is I am looking at the use of AI, because that's been a sociological question for me. Something sociological imagination started to come up, and it was through my observations of my classes. Are more and more students using AI in classes that are forbidden? What is the purpose? Is it because they feel like there's pressure from parents to get good grades, or is it at the last minute? And so, coming up with that, I came up with a sample survey. And so, looking at that, the first thing is I have to decide on a target group. Well, I'm not going to look at the use of AI in college and then give it to people that aren't even college students. That kind of defeats the purpose. So my target population for that would be college students, whether it's early college, dual enrolled, but they have to take college classes. Now, I can't go and send out my survey to every college student in America. And if I wanted to look at it globally and compare America to other countries in college, I can't do that to every college student around the world. And so I need what's called a sample group. Now, a good sample group would be somewhere around 30 to 50,000, 60 or 6,000. I'm sorry, 3,000 to 5,000 on a smaller scale. But even more, you get more reliable results, more information. But again, you have to look at the sample group. Another thing is that you have to look at when you're writing the survey questions to make sure that you're not using problematic questions. This would be leading questions. A leading question would be, wouldn't you think, or wouldn't you say that you receive more pressure from your parents to get good grades? Well, one of the problems is people like to, well, that must be what they're wanting me to say. So that whole word, wouldn't you? So you would have to define these questions a little bit more precise. Where do you receive pressure from to get good grades? Or do you receive pressure from outside sources other than yourself to receive good grades? And then another question being, where do you receive this pressure the most? Now, you also have a double-barreled question. This is another problematic question. You have to make sure that you're not adding two areas that you want to study. So if I go back to the AI and say, do you feel more pressure from your parents? Do you feel more pressured from guidance counselor? Do you feel more pressured from, and so they're kind of having to choose, or there's different areas that you are coming out with. Another great example, I have it right here, would be a double barrel and leading question. These are two at the same. And that one is, when utilizing AI, ChatGPT, Quizlet, or the other technology to complete assignments or tests, would you say that you did this to receive better grades or to appear smarter to your instructor? Well, there's so much information there that if it's all put in together, I can't really get good data out of that. So that's a leading question, wouldn't you? And double barrel, because there's so many other things in there. You want your surveys to be where you can gain and get either qualitative or quantitative data. Quantitative is right there in the word, quantity. Numbers. Quantitative data is, you can use bar graphs. You can get percentages. They're closed-ended questions, yes or no. Qualitative is you want to go a little bit further. You want to have a little bit more information. It's not just a yes or no. It's not something that you can put in just strictly percentages. A good qualitative would be if you go back to the socialization agents or people that put pressure on you. The question is, do you feel pressure from anyone other than yourself to make A's in college? And the question is yes or no. That's quantitative. Then I have another question that says, if you put yes, please state all agents in society where you feel pressure from. And then if you have felt pressure from any of the above, what kind of pressure is it? That's giving me more information, that qualitative. The other thing for quantity and qualitative is looking at, again, being able to bring out that data. You want to be able to get as much information so you can come up with the results. There's a survey that many of you have done, and it's called what's called a Likert scale. I have this, it is on the course evaluations. A Likert scale gives you, are you satisfied? Well, it starts with completely satisfied, satisfied, neutral, not satisfied, completely not satisfied. There's a big range instead of yes, no, happy, sad, whatever. And so that is called a Likert scale. Again, that's going to be quantitative data. On the course evaluations, then you're asked, why? What's your opinion? And it's getting more of that information. The next research method is what's called experiments. I do experiments all the time. I just did some the other last couple of semesters. But we talk about experiments. You're going to see Solomon Asch's experiment. You're going to see Stanley Milgram's experiment when we get into groups. There was the Robbers Cave experiment. There's a lot of experiments going on. Now, experiments this is more of controlled. People know that they're coming in and doing an experiment, but a lot of times you're not telling them exactly what it's about because that would ruin the results. So one of the experiments I did was a sociological question came up, and it was all about, are students accessing the instructional material on online classes, or are they just going straight to the assignments and looking it up on the internet? And so I started to kind of look at Moodle. That's our platform that we use. I start looking at, I can see everything that happens when students have logged in. I started looking at all the students. I started to ask questions. And so then I came up with an idea looking at my hypothesis. My hypothesis was that if I put a grade and force students to watch my video lectures, so if you're on my online class at Davidson Davy, you are forced because it is part of a grade, and I have a way to control that, and you have to answer my video lecture questions. The understanding of sociology and the concept will increase, and grades will increase. And so what I did was I had my control group and my experimental group. My experimental group last semester was that I did exactly what I said. I made the video lectures. I had video lecture questions. I tried this in a couple of my online classes. Then my control group, I left it completely the way it was before. Didn't touch it. And at the end of it, I did see an increase in grades and understanding for the ones that had to watch the instructional time, the video lectures. And now I'm using it all the time. So with experiments, you also have to make sure it's ethical. Do no harm to anybody. The Stanley Milgram experiment that you'll see in groups, there's a lot of questions about how ethical that was back in the day. They didn't see it that way, but now we kind of look back at that. Another research method that I mentioned in field study was content analysis. Now, for some of you, you're going to be doing a content analysis. Again, I put these lectures out for many, so if you're not in my classes and watching this, you wouldn't be. But I have students do a content analysis. I've given up a graph, and I have you watch clips of television shows from the 1970s all the way up to 2000s, and to start marking, how many were teens, how many were young adults, how many were friends, what's the marital status, race, and then being able to count that and look at how many times that topic comes up or that race, and then looking at patterns. You will do content analysis in different courses. They'll tell you to do a content analysis or a literature review. If you're looking at gun laws and homicides, how many times was it mentioned in a news story, and writing that down, and jotting that down, and then creating that data and coming up with the results and patterns. If you're going to do a study, the final research method is looking at existing sources. Before you jump in, you want to go ahead and do research. Has this study been done before? What's going on? Is there data out there? Or do I have to go get the data myself? During my graduate work, I did extensive work on domestic violence. And one of the questions that came up as I was doing a lot of other work and interactions and things like that, I started to wonder, and in my mind I said, I bet you, my hypothesis, I'm willing to say that domestic violence is higher in the South than the other three regions, North, Midwest, and West. And so I jumped in and I started doing existing sources, and I found surveys that were done, and I was able to take that data, and using a beginner's mind and being open, it was completely not what I thought after I looked at all the other data and looked at the existing sources. This can be government reports. There's a lot of data out there, so you don't have to start from scratch. And I found that actually the South was the third. Midwest was the highest. South, and then the West Coast came in fourth, which kind of blew me away, but I had to have a beginner's mind. In research methods, you also want to make sure that when you're doing studies, it's reliable. So if I came and asked you, what's your birthday? And you told me your birthday. And then I came back and I asked you, what's your birthday? And you told me your birthday again, and it's the same. And then I came back and asked you again, you're going to be annoyed, but I know it's reliable. Now, if you changed it up a couple times, I'm going to start wondering, what is your birthday? Why are you lying? But it needs to be reliable. It needs to be valid. Another issue that might come up is you have to make sure that it's ethical, confidential, which is why I still can't tell anybody about the bar. And you have to be aware of what's called reactivity. Reactivity is if you tell people, so if I've gone into the bar and told people, hey, I'm going to be doing a study over the next 8 weeks. I'm going to watch you all and how you interact with each other and flirting, and I'm going to be writing everything down. What do you think the response is going to be? People are going to be on their best behavior. We have video cameras. I was in a store the other day, and you can buy video cameras everywhere to put up, and we're all being watched by video cameras and security cameras and doorbell cameras and stuff. But now they're selling fake ones. It was like $5. And I had to laugh, but I understand the concept. You just put this video camera out there and people all of a sudden act differently when they're being watched. The term that came out was what was called the Hawthorne effect. There was a big study that was done at the Hawthorne factory many, many, many years ago. And people had found out that they were being studied. And they spent all this time and effort in studying this particular topic that they wanted to study at the factory. And after it was said and done, they found out that everybody knew, and they had to scrap all that data because of the Hawthorne effect. People change their behavior when they know that they're being studied. So, the reactivity can be an issue that comes up. In episode 1, we talked about the sociological perspectives, kind of introduced those to you. They are a way to study society from different lenses. Now, how that works is it depends on what are you interested in. When you have an idea of, I want to study this in society, I tend to lean, and I mentioned this before, but I tend to lean more for symbolic interaction. I'm what's called a symbolic interaction theorist. That is kind of my concentration. I'm always interested in studying society from the aspect of symbols, meanings we give to things, one-on-one interactions. Remember, it's a micro level. But if you want to know more about the functions, so if you wanted to study homelessness, whether you're doing a field study or an experiment or surveys, and you want to be more focused on a macro level, big picture across society, and you want to, what's the purpose? What's the function? How does this keep society stable? You're going to be more looking from and coming from the functionalism perspective. If you are more interested in the inequalities, how are people treated? Are people treated different based on social class in high-end retail stores, restaurants? You're going to be coming from more of a conflict theorist perspective. And then symbolic interaction, that day-to-day one-on-one. All right, so this ends the very quick of research methods, but it is important to know these because you're going to be faced, and you're going to see a lot of theories throughout the rest of the course. And it's very important to know that these theories have been valid and reliable. Many of them have been used and have been applied for 80 to 120 years now. You can't just say, oh, this is just opinion for these theories. These have been tried out, and you can see a lot of them. And if you look at your everyday life, which is why I focus on that in the application assignments, you will see that these theories still continue to make sense. Now, sociological perspective is a way to look at society. Theories are predictions. Now, not every incident, situation, theories are going to explain everything. They are predictions. So there could be other reasons for it. And these are called causal relationship. From looking at, let's say that the clown convention comes into Charlotte every year at the same time. And it's interesting to note that every year at that time that the clowns convention is in Charlotte, the DUI rate increases. And so you would think, okay, there's got to be a relationship there. These clowns come in and they're getting drunk, or they're causing other people to get drunk because people don't like clowns. But that's got to be the reason, right? However, the time of year that this happens is July 4th. So there could be other aspects to that. All right, so that's research methods. And the next part in our series will be culture. So look forward to that.